Okay, so let's start now. Hi, my name is Laura Schechter, and then go on into your pitch.
Okay. Hi, my name is Laura Schechter, and I consider myself a perceptual realist, which means I'm painting usual vision, and what I usually paint is one moment of light. Till about 10 years ago, I was a still life artist where I was observing my still life, which I controlled, and now, then I switched over to cityscapes. And since my work is very labor intensive, I couldn't paint on the street, so I started taking photographs, and now I consider my work photo-based. But I work a lot on my photographs because the camera only sees with one eye, monofocal, and I see with two eyes, and so I'm always converting camera vision into as close as I can get it to what I consider usual vision.
So why talk about the catalyst of the switch from going from still lifes to graffiti?
Okay. What it is, I was painting the still life for many years, and as a painter, I used to say I was painting different problems, and then all of a sudden, I just didn't have anything to say in these different problems, and I considered this a crisis, and I tried to keep it up, and I was looking for something a little different to do, and my husband had some photographs of the cityscapes, specifically one of the Gowanus that I chose, from the F train, and I found it very interesting trying to do something I knew nothing about. And it took me about 7 years before I felt I was really halfway competent in doing the cityscape. I had to learn how to paint the sky, I had to learn how to paint trees, if there was a little car there. And then about 4 or 5 years ago, I got interested in graffiti. And what it is, it wasn't just the isolated graffiti, it was graffiti in the context of the city. And this started because I happened to do one painting of graffiti, and I exhibited at the National Academy, and the curators told me about this place that I should check out, and it turned out to be 5 Points, which was the most important graffiti site in the world until it was just taken down about 2 years ago. And then I got really interested to see what was happening in different neighborhoods with graffiti, and I started walking around. And it took me a while, and I realized that my relationship with graffiti had to do with what it was doing to what I would call blighted neighborhoods. It was beautifying them. And because a lot of the work was being done in abandoned factories or any kind of abandoned area. And I started thinking about that a lot, and I started responding to the fact that graffiti is a continuation of, within 10,000 years of art, of being involved with decorative motifs. And especially the early graffiti, the amount of colors were very limited. What we now call aerosol art. They were high-key colors. There was a red, there was a turquoise, there was a black. And so having that kind of limited color, people were maximizing their experience.
So talk about Brooklyn. Talk about what it is to be an artist in Brooklyn back then compared to now.
Define back then.
Say 60s. I mean, because your career started in the 60s,
okay.
Right?
I was extremely lucky in the beginning of my career because there were 2 venues that I was able to meet other artists and discuss issues that were extremely important. When I went to school, I was doing abstract expressionism because I graduated in 1965. And obviously, it's going a very long way from being an abstract expressionist painter to being someone with a lot of dexterity and doing very detailed, work. And so it was the beginning of something that I would now call contemporary realism, which was started in the 60s. And we were extremely lucky because at the Educational Alliance, we were having meetings every Friday. And there was between maybe 100 and 300 of us who were at every level of their career. And we were discussing issues every single week that were being worked out at the moment, and contemporary realism, which of course has a very broad thing from minimalist work to people who were painterly, narration. And all these things got defined, and for a moment in the late 60s and the early 70s, we were the most important art movement in America. And then in the 1970s, I went to meetings in the feminist movement. And so what really made it different is that we were able to have these meetings because we didn't have the real crisis we have now with rent. So that is really what the big difference is. The big difference is it was easy to be an artist in the 1960s, the 1970s, and the 1980s because it didn't cost much to rent your own apartment, which usually you were able to work in your own apartment or your own loft. Galleries were not paying insane rents, and we were able to have these meetings, that were professionally linked, that we were able to exchange ideas. So I would say that those are the really big differences. And right now, it's a huge crisis for artists who have to have lofts. And they're just losing them left and right because they're being converted into condos. Very simple.
Especially, I'm assuming you're talking especially about the artists that need a lot of room.
A lot of room, right.
The iron workers.
Everybody, because now rents are so high that they can't even have a 2-bedroom apartment where normally the second bedroom would be your studio. And so, and also the artists make it very different now. They have to pay tuition. I had no tuition.
You mentioned that your work, the photorealism it's photo based, and I know that you're talking about you take the photo, you lighten it so you can see all the color. Do you want to talk about that?
I can tell you the difference between photorealism and photo based.
Okay.
In photorealism, the subject matter is the photograph. So those people who define themselves as photorealists really render what the photograph is saying, which again is I will define as monofocal vision because that's what the camera sees. I am using my photograph as a reference. And even though my photographs keep on getting better all the time, I treat them very badly because I don't want them to be confused with my artwork. In a kind of way, I'm using the photograph as a sketch because my process is I take the photograph and then I blow it up. And then I make a tracing. And then I fix the tracing. And then I transfer the tracing to the canvas, and then I'm fixing it again. So and the fixing that I'm doing is simple things like making verticals, vertical, trying to make, because sometimes the camera does very extreme perspective. And then there's something else that I've been dealing with, because I guess I told you that I have 2 photographs. The one that's my primary photograph, and the one that I lighten up so I can really see what's happening in the blacks. But basically, the other thing is that the camera always sees everything darker. So it looks more dramatic, but it's a thing that I'm always thinking about. Am I going to be as dark as the photograph, or am I going to make a compromise between my light and photograph? It's interesting, because no matter what you do, you always have issues.
So talk to me about when you, sort of the process, even take me back a step further. So it's like, okay, I'm going to go walk around New York, find graffiti that I like, take the picture, come home, print out the bigger one, or print out the 2 copies and use those as a reference. Can talk about how sometimes you take a truck from one place.
Oh yeah, that was the thing too. It's the idea that sometimes a photograph isn't perfect, and then I started getting really involved with the graffiti trucks, which is. I think only New York really has the graffiti trucks, and some of them are magnificent. They are, and I probably have 40 or 50 graffiti trucks. So I was saying to myself, well, how can I use the graffiti trucks? And then I also have some magnificent walls, that really don't have, it's not in the context, of the whole cityscape behind it. So then the first thing I did was a wall with a truck in front of it. And then I just made a little sidewalk space up. But then I started thinking about other things. I had certain paintings where they were just not worthy enough to be a painting. And the minute I put in 1 or 2 graffiti trucks, they were perfect.
with the number of graffiti paintings that you've done, have you seen that you've done, maybe you've painted work from the same graffiti artist? Do you know any of the
I don't, okay, now this is a really interesting question, because it's like, how much do I know about what's happening with the graffiti artist, with the graffiti scene? I do see things being, repeated, some signatures. I'm really much more interested in the walls, not murals, but where people have what they call the tagging, their tags. And there are some people that you'll just see them on every wall and on every truck, and you kind of get used to it. And I want to say something about the walls. I really appreciate a well-developed wall. I think all walls start random. But I think when the graffiti artists come to them, they see the general composition of the wall. And when they put their tag down, that's not random. They are designing that wall. And so I will come back to some things that I like every year. Like one of the best things is the Manhattan Bridge looking into Chinatown. A few places like that. Of course, I don't have 5 Points anymore. And it also involves a lot of walking and a lot of surprises, and it involves taking the trains. Because now that the graffiti artists don't do their work on the train, they do it so it can be seen from the train. They do it so they can be seen from the expressways. And so what I'll do is I'll take a train and it'll be really good. Or then I'll take a train where I don't know something. It's like an experiment. I took the number 4 train up to the Bronx. And then I would get off and then I would walk underneath. And then you can still get things doing that. And it's an endless surprise, what I'm going to come across. And I just spent a week in London where I was given 2 geographic places to go to. And then everybody was giving me more places to go to. And I went to different neighborhoods, and they were all very different. I mean, everybody knows about Brick Lane, which is some reason, and this thing next to it called Shoreditch. But then I would go to these other places, and again...
I want to stop you real fast, Laura, for a second. Annie, can you grab a glass of water for her?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah,
when you start talking, you
get a little dry.
Yeah. No, this is all great. I think next, let's start over about London and start talking about London and why you went there and you found out other places, yada yada yada.
Yeah.
And maybe try to compare and contrast.
Yeah, that's what I want to compare. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was the big thing, that I saw the differences.
Yeah.
That was an amazing thing.
Hold it, don't
I know.
say it
Yeah.
right yet.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Okay.
Okay.
So we're at about 15 minutes right now, so we're doing good.
Wait, where should I put it? Okay, that's a good idea. Okay.
Reach it if you need it.
There was another reason I went to London. I'll say that when we start up again. Okay.
Okay, so yeah.
Okay, in May I went to London for a week, and one of the reasons that I decided that London would be a good place to go is I really like the way graffiti looks on old brick and old wood. I don't really like the way it looks on some new building. And I was told, and I checked it out, and Brick Lane was a place that's the most popular. I mean, you go there on a Sunday and there's like 20,000 people. And Shoreditch was before that, and then I learned about other neighborhoods. And one of the really remarkable one is the night before the last day, I went to a panel, and some art critic said to me, "Do you know about Waterloo Station Tunnel?" And that's called the Graffiti Tunnel. Oh, and everything you do in London, you have to ask like 5 people to get where you're going. I mean, because no one knows the streets or anything. So I get to this tunnel, and it was like going into the Vatican. The Sistine Chapel. It was covered, the sides and the ceiling and every single surface, and it's black, and it had these bright lights. It was impossible to photograph. I mean, a few times my camera froze, but the experience was amazing, and hopefully I'll be able to do something with it. And one of the things that I was beginning to get this feeling that there was a big difference between London and New York. And and I mean, graffiti now is really all over the world. So I mean, so I think in general, we could say New York is the only place where it really naturally came up from the poor, in poor neighborhoods. And it evolved slowly, you know, and whatever it is. But I'm looking at this London graffiti, and I'm saying, well, what is it that I'm seeing that's different? And what I'm seeing is different is that they make an outline, and then they fill it in. Well, here, the graffiti artist uses their whole arm, and they get in the motion of their arm, and they also get in all the small things that the aerosol can will do. A drip, a fade out, and it's what makes New York graffiti more interesting. And so you can, but what London makes out is that there's so much of it, and so many people are doing it, that it becomes this huge visual experience that we just don't have here, because I really think the government is even encouraging it, because people are really coming and taking graffiti tours. So it's making a lot of money for them.
Have you noticed, or did you talk to anyone about the laws against it? Speaking of the government,
We're talking about here or there?
Both.
Okay, yeah, I was lucky enough to find out a lot of information about that, because there was an extremely interesting panel at the Museum of the City of New York where they had a politician, and this is really funny, it was a police officer who was a graffiti police officer who, after he retired, became a graffiti collector. I mean, it's very weird. And personally, I have seen very little graffiti that you could say shouldn't be there. You know, and when I see graffiti that shouldn't be there, it kind of makes me angry. Because I think graffiti artists really knows where it belongs. You know, which is the abandoned buildings, old buildings. I mean, it doesn't really make sense in a neighborhood that, you know, just had some house built and you're going to put graffiti on it. What, that doesn't mean anything.
And you're using graffiti and murals differently.
I'm still using those differently. Okay. Right now, almost all the murals are legal. That's the word they use, is legal and illegal. And so the murals, you apply, or you go, you know, through the city, or the city might even give you a grant to do it, or you go to some building and you ask the landlord, can I put up, you know, something there? And I have a lot of problems with a lot of the murals. To me, it just sort of looks like the doodle that some high school boy would do, you know, and they don't make sense. But then on the international level, especially when they're having some kind of fair, you know, everybody, you have to apply for it, some of those are becoming extremely competent. So, I mean, to generalize about graffiti murals, it's hard for me to say. I was really upset when I went up to East Harlem. They got rid of all the tags, and they had these really mediocre murals up there. I mean, so it makes no sense to me. That made no sense, and I was pretty upset.
Do you want to talk about Ben's, any of Ben's stuff at this point? Or
okay, I have one other thing. I want to put one other thing in about the graffiti, which I think is important.
Please.
Okay, my intent was not to preserve the graffiti, but because many of my paintings have graffiti where the buildings have been destroyed already, it becomes another record of the graffiti. And because I render the graffiti artist's work so perfectly, you have even a better record than maybe even a photograph would have. I'd like to say that, even as I say, preservation. It also becomes a tool of preservation.
Have any graffiti artists, have you had any contact that you just like coincidentally have their work in your work and you met?
Oh, this is a funny story. Mm-hmm. You run into graffiti artists from the 70s, some of which are still doing some work or not doing some work, and they all have these names, you know. God, now I can't remember his name. Okay, I met this graffiti artist who is older and very successful now. Even he has his own. He's in the clothing thing, And I met him at an opening, and we were corresponding, and I sent him one of my last paintings. And one of the paintings happened to have been things that were murals, but not, more complicated murals, not like cartoon figures or something. Lima, Peru. And it was one of his. And this was the funniest thing in the whole world because this was a commission. He went down to Lima and he was given a third of, this very interesting wall, which was a building that was decaying behind it, an adobe building. And that was very funny. He said, "That's me." And I know I have a reputation. I'm the old lady who can paint anybody's graffiti. So.
What are your plans? Why don't you talk about some of the things that you're working on right now in this year and what's happening with your career?
Okay, this is really interesting because I had a very big career in the beginning of my career, and just like any other in the arts or in the movies, it goes up and down and up and down, and it kind of levels off. Well, since I started doing my graffiti, it's really taken off. And so this raises issues about, it was not my intention to choose something that was going to be popular. But I am doing something that everybody is interested in. And it's opportunities are coming up. I've already won 3 grants. I'm having a lot more exhibitions. A lot more is being written about my work. And I'm trying not to feel guilty about it. But it was also something, we talked, my husband, Ben Schechter, who passed away last year, he taught me something when I first met him. We had a relationship where we really helped each other because we were coming in with different levels of expertise. Since he was coming in more as a commercial artist, illustrator, he taught me this kind of, it's hard to put it in words, but this is what it kind of boils down to. Let's say there's 2 things you really are very interested in, and one of them is going to be easier to sell. It's a no-brainer. You choose the one that's easier to sell. Or you directing your work to be more accessible to people is not a bad thing. I mean, you don't do something, to make it in the art world or to sell your paintings, but if you can tweak it a little bit to make it more accessible, then that's your job, because your job is a public job. The thing is, I'm making paintings for the public to see and for private individuals to buy or museums to buy.
Perfect. That's perfect.
Yeah. Okay, so ask me a question about Ben.
Okay. Let me see, where are we? You said that you and Ben helped each other a lot. Talk about his art. Talk about how your art differed and how you were able to.
Okay.
What's the different expertise that you each brought?
Okay, well, what it is so I was this person that knew a lot about art history. I mean, I think an artist should really know the 10,000 years of art. And he came in as a commercial artist who really wanted to do something in fine art. And he had lots of skills and he knew a lot of things. So immediately he taught me about presentation. He was in charge of all the framing and the matting. And he also had the intuition, when I first met him, he said, well, let's take all the art news magazines. And in those days, art news was reviewing every single show. So he just sat down, and by looking through art news, he figured out which galleries I should approach. So it was that kind of understanding, how you make your career a career, outside of your actual painting. And so we were talking a lot, and he wasn't really doing anything that serious, but he at least was getting the words. And he even went back to the studios that he was working in, and he comes from Israel, so his English was not as perfect when I first met him, and he was using language that nobody in the studio understood. Like, he kept on using words like metaphorical and metaphysical, and they were like looking at him, like he was. And so eventually he started doing his own work, and his own work was just, he would come home in the nighttime tired, and he would put his pen down. And he was just doing things from his unconscious, which he later, by the time he finished it was a composition. And he had skills in lots of things. In the beginning, as a commercial artist, he was a rapidograph, so he was doing things with a rapidograph. And then he started doing things even with dots with a rapidograph, which was a kind of a pointillist idea. And eventually, he was doing some very interesting paintings, gouache paintings, where he was taking source material. A lot of them were the painted ladies, Victorian houses, and also constructing his own landscape behind it. And from another source material, he might bring in a flower. Now, if this is sounding a little familiar, like what I'm doing in my cityscapes, yes, it absolutely all came from Ben, because as a person who's very literal, it would have never dawned on me to use a photograph as a source. It would have never dawned on me to mix my sources up. And so one of the things he taught me, because if you have this thing that's not really making sense, like you're taking your source material from two different places, or even sometimes when I was doing my still lifes, and the little problems with perspective, his word was make it plausible. So that's all you have to do. So he taught me that concept, the concept of making it plausible. And even sometimes my photographs now will have areas, because I'm not using a $3,000 camera, I'm using a simple camera, where I don't know what I am looking at. It is like a tremendous mystery to me. And so one of the last things he left me with, as I was getting these problems over and over again, his words to me were, paint it beautifully. So if you make it plausible and you paint it beautifully, you can get away with anything, And so what he learned from me was 10,000 years of art.
And talk about what is 10,000 years?
Well, 10,000. We started making art when, very early. We've got the cave paintings. People were making jewelry to adorn themselves. I mean, the minute that we had some leisure time, and even had, we were making art. And then of course, we have all those civilizations. I mean, we have the Persians, we have all the art of India, however far you can go back. And certain ideas get repeated. And so I feel that we really have to know all of the art, and then we pick out that which suits us. I mean, it's like you could never know enough. And part of the problems now with I am mortified. I am meeting, I didn't know it, but I am actually meeting young artists that do not know art history. And that's why a lot of contemporary art, because of course the art world is extremely fragmented, the word that I would say would be superficial. Like if you're just doing an odd idea that's something that's in the air, and you don't have that kind of historic background that we're all like evolving from, the work just looks facile. It might be decorative, it might even be beautiful, but is it really important enough to be around? Probably not. I mean, these people who are doing this kind of work, they can get all the press, they can have all the Wall Street people like buy their work, but if it doesn't, as I say, if it doesn't have that full 10,000 years that you're going to pick on for your own work, it has no meaning. And so Ben was this person who did lots of things well, and this is one of the other things that I learned. Every historic period needs a different personality type. And what the personality type now, or we can say since at least the middle of the 19th century, when artists were becoming independent, are people who are going to have a problem. Again, as an artist, I call it a problem that is your problem. That's the only thing that has meaning for you. And when you have this, then you can do your work, and you don't have to get paid for it. And whatever obstacles are put in front of you, it doesn't stop you, because that's your problem, and nothing else counts. Before that, we had ateliers, we had workshops. Which is the equivalent of now the illustrator and the commercial artist, which meant that the person could be extremely skillful, but then there'd be 20 people who are working for somebody who had the idea. And so, then there's other things. It's like what your skills are. Like my skills, I would be able to do like, in a monastery, copying stuff or doing little books in Persia. But I could never be a Baroque painter because I don't have that flair, that big movement. So, I mean, these are kind of all the things that define you as an artist or of your time or what you're doing. Okay, Ben was more of a dilettante, and he accepted that word, and he didn't see it as something that was bad. So he had almost a kind of a limited dedication to some work. So he was doing work over a 25, 30-year period, and then when he was 55, he just stopped on a dime and switched over and eventually got more interested in music, singing, and playing instruments. And so it was very interesting seeing how his involvement with doing his own fine art, and how he couldn't have the thing that would carry him over for the whole of his life. I mean, he might have started again. We don't know, but that's why his different kinds of work, and and he did get a lot of recognition for what he was doing, and and what I call us as like a two-person atelier, and we were two artists that only supported each other and only gave to each other. And now that he's not here, one of the things that I have to do is I have to decide when my paintings were finished. Before that, they were never finished until Ben told me they were finished.
And have you been able to make that designation?
I have been able to do it. It's very interesting. I mean, I can say that one of the romantic things he said to me, because we were not a romantic couple. We were married 48 years, but without, we don't do those kind of, surficial romantic things. But before he died, he said to me, the only reason I don't want to die is I want to see what's going to happen with your career and what happens with my grandchildren. And he didn't really want to leave me alone, but I was prepared, because I knew that it was possible, like in the last year. And I have to say that I'm doing very well, and I'm able to do all the things, without him, because of I still know he still says things to me like while I'm working, You
still hear him coaching you along.
Right. We should take some pictures of his work too.
Yeah. So I think this is a good place to stop.
Yeah.
I think we should...
We should go upstairs because there may be some other paintings you want to photograph.
I think so. Say
Okay.
Yeah. If you were, in 10 years, they're going to make a movie about your career, who would you want to play Laura Schechter? And even maybe there's like a younger version, a middle version, or even just a later version, or maybe you'd have to think about it. But that's usually what I ask people.
Selma Hayek.
Selma Hayek would play you.
Right. Her complexion is darker than my complexion.
Slightly.
Yes. Yeah. But I have that universal look.
Yeah, I think Selma Hayek's a good choice.
Right. Yeah. Selma.
And what about anything for like growing up or like? No, I think Selma Hayek's good.
Or that other one, but her complexion is lighter.
Sofia Vergara.
Well, no, I was saying she doesn't look like me, but she's so. The one who was born in Israel, who's in like the Black Swan. What's her name?
Oh, Natalie Portman.
Natalie Portman.
Natalie Portman.
Oh, maybe if we took Natalie Portman and Selma Hayek and we put them together, that would.
Fair enough. Yeah.
That's your movie question.
Yeah. Perfect.